There are three cases in English: the nominative, the objective, and the possessive. The nominative case equals the subject of a sentence. So, for example, in the sentence, the boy threw the ball quite far, boy is the subject of the sentence, so it's in the nominative case. The objective case is used to identify the direct object, the indirect object, and the object of the preposition. Note that Latin, which is the basis for English grammar, has 5 cases. The direct object, the indirect object, and the object of the preposition are all separate cases. So be happy that English has folded all of those into one case. So in the sentence, the boy threw the ball quite far. The object, or the direct object of the sentence, is ball. So it's in the objective case. And then we have the possessive, which is composed of possessive adjectives and possessive pronouns. An example: the boy threw the girl's ball. In this sentence, girl is possessive, so it's girls, and it's defining the noun ball, so it's identifying who owns the ball. So it's the girl owns the ball, the girl's ball. So it's being used here as a possessive adjective describing ball. All right, let's look at a few more examples of nouns in different cases. The first sentence: the father caught the ball. In this sentence, father is the subject. It's in the nominative case. The boy hit his father with the ball. In this case, in this sentence, father is the direct object, so it's in the objective case. The boy threw his father the ball. In this example, his father is the indirect object, so it's also in the objective case. The boy threw the ball to his father. In this sentence, father is the object of the preposition to, but again, it's still in the objective case. The father's pitches were fast. In this sentence, father is a possessive adjective that modifies the noun pitches, so it is in the possessive case. So the point here that I'm trying to illustrate is that other than adding an apostrophe s, the noun father does not change its form as it's used in the nominative, objective, or possessive cases. This is a simplification of what is called a declension. In languages such as Latin, Greek, and German, nouns are declined as they're used in different cases, meaning that they take on different endings depending on what case they're being used in. Perhaps you've heard people speaking of grammar and using the word conjugation and declension interchangeably. That's wrong. A conjugation applies to the verb. We conjugate verbs, we change the verb forms, we change the endings of verbs, that we go through the various tenses, or even in the present case, we go through various persons as well as tense. That's conjugation. Declension applies only to nouns, pronouns, and adjectives. When we decline a noun, a pronoun, or an adjective, that means that we're changing the form of the noun, pronoun, or adjective to show its case. English has greatly simplified declension in nouns and adjectives. Other than the apostrophe s to indicate a possessive, we no longer decline nouns and pronouns. So the forms remain the same regardless of the case, and we can only determine case in English by a word's position in the sentence and its relation to the other elements in the sentence. In a language with full declensions such as Latin or German, it is theoretically possible to move the nouns in the sentence to any position and the sentence will still make sense because the ending tells us if the word is the subject, the direct object, or the indirect object. The simplification of nouns in English, however, cannot be said of the pronoun. Since pronouns can replace nouns, that means that pronouns can also be used in the nominative, the objective, and possessive cases. Unlike nouns, however, pronouns in English still decline. They still change form as they are used in different cases. In addition, pronouns take person, first, second, and third, and have both singular and plural forms. So unlike a noun, where we only have to learn a singular and a plural form, with pronouns, we have to learn 26 forms. Then in addition, there is the relative pronoun who and whoever, which also decline. Here is a table of the pronoun forms in English. As you can see, the pronouns change depending on case, but they also change depending on the person and the number. So in English, we have a first person singular, we have second person, we have third person singular masculine, third person singular feminine, third person singular neuter, and then a first person plural and a third person plural. English actually used to be even more complicated than this because in German and Latin, we also have a second person informal and a second person formal. And the informal also had a singular and a plural. So, for example, the second person in singular, informal, we still see in some religious literature, the informal singular was thou, and the plural was thee. And we also then had the formal, which was you. So somewhere along the line of the evolution of the English language, we adopted you as the only form of the second person, both singular and plural. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. All right, so when we look across the cases, you see how the pronouns change. So first is person singular, I is the nominative, me is the objective, possessive is my as an adjective, and the possessive pronoun is mine. Similarly, we see you, your, yours, he, him, his, she, her, hers, it, its, we, us, our, ours, they, them, their, theirs. And then we also have who and whom and whoever. So who, whom, whose. I'm sorry, who, whom, whose, and then whomever, whoever, whomever, whosever. So those are the forms of pronouns declined in the English language across the three cases. All right, let's look at a few examples of pronouns being used in the various cases. Pronouns need to be in the nominative case when they are the subject of a sentence, when they are the subject of a clause, and when they're used as predicate nominatives following linking verbs. So some examples here. I go to the movies often. I is the subject of the sentence, so we use the nominative case for first person singular. You should come with me to the movies. Again, this is the subject of a sentence, second person nominative. They never have time to go to the movies. This is the subject of the sentence is they, and again, it's third person plural. On Sunday evenings, we watch foreign films. We is the subject of the sentence. It is nominative case, first person plural. All right, let's continue looking at examples of pronouns in the nominative case. Here we have some examples of pronouns in the nominative case when they are the subject of a dependent clause. So, for example, I go to matinees often because I can get a discount. Because I can get a discount is a dependent clause. And as you notice, it's the subject of the dependent clause is I, so it's in the nominative case. Despite what she told us, we still like to eat sushi. Despite what she told us is a dependent clause. The subject is she. It's in the nominative case. And then finally, Lola told us that she had gained weight. Here we have a relative clause that starts with that, and the subject of that relative clause is she. So again, the pronoun is in the nominative case. So the final thing to look at are pronouns in the nominative case when we have a predicate nominative. As you recall, a predicate nominative is in a sentence where we have a linking verb. When we have a linking verb, the subject of the sentence and the predicate nominative on the other side of the verb have to be in the same case, in this case, nominative. And this is the area in English that, with regard to case, that is one of the problem areas because we have a tendency to want to put the pronouns on the right side of the equation, or as we say, after the linking verb, in the objective case instead of the nominative case. It just sounds queer to us sometimes when we speak to use the nominative, and therefore we use the objective case. So, for example, the question, who's there? It is I. I'll bet almost everyone will say, it is me. That's wrong grammatically. It's how we say it in spoken English, but grammatically it's wrong. It is I. I is the nominative case. The linking verb calls for nominative case. This is a predicate nominative. It was they who authorized the transfer. Again, it is in the nominative case. Linking verb was. So the subject, the predicate nominative, has to be also they. It was they, not them. It may be they at the door. Again, most people probably would say it may be them at the door, but that is wrong. It's nominative case because linking verb is may be. Therefore, we need a nominative pronoun. That is she who stole my wallet. Same thing. We see that is a predicate, is a nominative case, is linking verb, so we need a nominative case, she. And finally, that's I. I'll bet no one says that except for very, very proper people. That's me is probably much more common when you're pointing, for example, to a photo and you say, yeah, that's me. But correct grammar would be that's I. So the point I want to make here is if the correct grammar sounds too formal for you, then rewrite the sentence. Say, for example, in answering the question, who's there, simply say, I am. Or instead of saying it was they who authorized the transfer, say they authorized the transfer. You could say, I think that they are at the door, instead of they may be It may be they at the door. She is the person who stole my wallet instead of that is she who stole my wallet. And again, instead of saying that's I, you could say here I am or something like that. Now let's look at some usage of the pronouns in the objective case. First off, if a pronoun is a direct object in a sentence, then it is in the objective case. Some examples. Bell Labs hired me in 1980. Me is the objective form, the objective case of the first person singular. I saw her yesterday. Her is the direct object of the sentence. It's also in the objective case, third person singular. Finally, I should ask them for a favor. Them is the third person plural form of the pronoun in the objective case. Another use of the objective case is with indirect objects. So here we have a few more examples. He gave her a diamond ring. In this sentence, he is the subject, diamond ring's the object, it's what he gave her. And to whom did he give the ring? Her. So her is third person singular objective case. I bought you a soda yesterday. You is the indirect object. I, the subject. Soda is the direct object. You doesn't change across the objective and the nominative case, but in this case, it's still the indirect object. And then finally, can you lend me a pen? You is the subject, pen is the object, me in the objective case is the indirect object. Another use of pronouns in the objective case is when a pronoun is used as the object of a preposition. So, for example, please give that back to me. Me is the first person objective case, and it is the object of the preposition to. I spoke to him this morning. Again, him is the objective case, third person singular masculine, and it's the object of the preposition to. Another case where we use pronouns in the objective case is when we have pronouns that are objects of verbals. So, for example, I drove 3 hours to see her. To see is a verbal. It's the infinitive. It's an infinitive verbal. And the entire infinitive phrase is to see her. So, her is the object of the verbal to see. Therefore, it's in the objective case. Or here we have an example with a participial verbal. Waking him up every morning is, waking him up every morning is a chore. Waking is the present tense participle, and him is the object of that. So we have the third person singular objective case, masculine, him. The third case in the English language is the possessive case. So let's look in a little bit more detail at the possessive case. Pronouns in the possessive case show ownership. So some possessive pronouns will modify nouns and therefore act as adjectives. I need to wash my car. My is a possessive. It's being used as an adjective. It's describing car. Our house is for sale. Our is first person plural. It's the possessive modifying the noun house. His wig looks fake. His is third person singular masculine. It's modifying the noun wig. Her dress is too short. Her is third person singular feminine, possessive, modifying the noun dress. As I noted in the previous slide, we have pronoun forms that basically are functioning as adjectives. But we also have, in the possessive case, we have pronoun forms that actually function as true pronouns in that they are replacing a noun in the sentence. And some of these have different forms from the possessive adjectives. So, for example, that car is mine. Mine is different from my. My is the adjective. Mine is the pronoun in its pure form. So that car is mine. I could say that car is my car, but then I have to repeat the noun. So instead, I'm using a true pronoun to replace the noun car, and I'm saying that car is mine. It combines the adjective my and the noun car into one. The house for sale is ours. So again, we have a possessive pronoun that is replacing the noun house, and its form also is different from the adjective. The adjective form is our, the possessive pronoun form is ours. The fake looking wig is his. Here's an example where the form does not change. It's his as an adjective and it's his as a pure pronoun. Unlike the feminine, however, the short dress is hers. Hers is the pure pronoun form, whereas her, without the S, is the adjectival form. So these are things that we just have to learn, and as in the previous slides, they were presented all in the table. Also note that it's as an adjective and as a pure pronoun, possessive pronoun, are also the same, but it's is rarely used as a standalone possessive pronoun. We're not likely to write a sentence such as, the dog won an award, this certificate is its. We're more likely to write, here is its certificate. I want to make a couple other points about possessives that are problem areas. But first, let me note that possessive pronouns are most often used as adjectives modifying a noun. We don't use the pure possessive pronouns as pronouns in English. It's a little bit more formal. But since a gerund is a participle functioning as a noun, a possessive can also modify a gerund, and this is a common mistake that people make. My mother never liked my staying out late. I often hear a mistake here. My mother never liked me staying out late. But staying is a gerund, and therefore the pronoun, the adjectival pronoun preceding the noun should be a possessive pronoun. So it should be my staying, not the objective case me. What's liked is not me. What's liked is the entire the entire gerund phrase. My mother liked my staying out late. His driving like a drunk makes me crazy. Here we have a gerund phrase as the subject of the sentence, and again, driving is the gerund, it's a noun, so it should be preceded by the adjectival possessive pronoun his driving. Are you tired yet of my lecturing? Again, lecturing is a gerund. It's being used in this sentence as the object of the preposition of, and therefore should be preceded by my, not me. Punctuation with possessives is another problem area. Remember that the apostrophe S is already built into the possessive pronouns. So pay attention to the incorrect uses of his, its, yours, hers, ours, and theirs. They do not require an apostrophe in there, so when they're being used as possessive pronouns, you do not add an apostrophe.